Donald Trump today has won the popular vote. He's won the Senate with a big majority. He's got a big majority already on the Supreme Court. He's going to win the House.
There is no one stopping him from implementing whatever he is threatening or promising to do. So if he wants to deport 11 million people, immigrants, he's got to get on with it.
Project 25 went into hiding for the course of the election, the last few weeks of the election campaign. They're going to come back out of the woodwork now to deliver on the full-throated MAGA project. I think it's going to be change.
I said that many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness. And now we are going to fulfill that mission together. We're going to fulfill that mission.
Kamala Harris told her crowds at the rallies, "We're not going back." It turns out we are.
And there ain't no stopping Donald Trump now. Not only has he handsomely won the White House, but the Republicans control the Senate. They'll control the House. There are conservatives in the Supreme Court. Nothing seems to be able to stand in his way this time round. And that is different from 2016. Welcome to the Newsagents.
The Newsagents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And what a utterly gorgeous morning. I'm just talking meteorology. It is hot, the sun is shining, flags are fluttering, there is the autumn leaves everywhere.
Hail to the chief.
Hail to the chief. It looks like a kind of pastoral scene of American beauty out there. But it was a bad night for Kamala Harris, where everything that could go wrong went wrong.
On the plus side, they are now taking down all the barricades, all the barbed wire, all the fencing, because there wasn't actually a riot in the middle of the night.
Yeah, it turns out the Harris supporters aren't the ones they were afraid of.
Who knew?
Whether there are any guardrails on democracy now is another question.
That won't be fixed with barbed wire.
The early indications came quickly when you saw kind of counties that you've never even heard of, but you compared how Kamala Harris was polling compared to Joe Biden 4 years ago, and that was the early signs that things are not looking good for her. And sure enough, that is the way the night unfolded. As state after state, county after county showed that Trump was doing better than expected, she doing worse.
And that mobilisation of the vote didn't in fact happen. I mean, the story that we thought we were telling on Saturday, that we felt we had seen with our own eyes, was how Democrats in Pennsylvania were crisscrossing the state and getting it out, and their ground game was superior, and they'd spent $1 billion on ads. And actually fewer people went to vote. They didn't go out. I mean, not as many people literally voted as 4 years ago.
Yeah, so the Biden-Harris ticket back in 2020 has over 80 million votes. The ticket now has got 66 million votes. So 14 million votes have been lost in 4 years. There is not a single county where Kamala Harris has overperformed relative to what Joe Biden did in 2020. That itself is, just in cephalological terms, unusual. Even in bad election defeats, normally you can find somewhere, anywhere, where a defeated candidate has done better than their equivalent did in 2020, and they didn't. In nearly every single state in this country, there was a move, if not an outright lurch, to the right, to the Republican Party. And indeed, just to illustrate that, Donald Trump claimed closer last night to winning New York than Kamala Harris did to winning Florida. That is the scale of the transformation in the electoral fortunes of the two parties. Donald Trump put together a coalition, a racial coalition, a coalition of voters of all ages across geography and places, suburb, city, rural areas, that was the biggest and most diverse for any Republican candidate since the 1980s.
I'm going to give you that coalition in numbers now, because the Daily Beast's Harry Lambert's put some of these together, and they just read really starkly. So when it comes to men, he won men by 4 points in 2020. That leapt to 10 points last night. Women, Trump was up by 2. He gained ground with women. Between the 18 to 29-year-olds, he was up 11 young voters. Between 30 to 34, he was up 7. And between 45 to 64, he was up 4. So it's not like you need the groups anymore. To your point, he was up everywhere. Black voters, he was up 9. I mean, that is extraordinary. Hispanic voters, he was up 16. He won Hispanic men by 10. He lost them by 23 in 20. So you are just looking at a totally different Republican Party from start to finish, from old to young, black to white college educated. He was up 3.
I mean, what is interesting, and it sort of makes the polling failures of 2016 and 2020 seem worse, for the simple reason that in 2016 Trump was a new phenomenon, and it was largely elderly, white, non-college educated men who had gone off the grid, who came back on the grid to register. Why were the pollsters not picking this up, that Donald Trump was making so many significant gains?
I think the pollsters did pretty well.
They were, in fairness. I mean, we were talking...
Everyone was saying it was neck and neck and everything within the margin of error.
But we were talking in the summer about the polls which showed that Harris was struggling with so many of the traditional Democratic voter bases. And the truth is that the polls probably did still underestimate him a bit. But the truth is that, okay, so it was a dead heat in a lot of states. He won quite a few of these states by 2, 3, 4 points. It isn't so far off the margin of error. We were saying yesterday, it doesn't take much to end up getting a bit of a blowout. But just on the point about the Democrats, I mean, I was sort of saying it last night, but I think it's even worse now. This is such a body blow for the Democratic Party. Like, this is way worse than 2016. In 2016, you could say, this is a bit of a blip. Hillary ran a bad campaign, and she basically lost by, 110,000 votes or so in 3 states across the Rust Belt. Donald Trump today has won the popular vote. He's won the Senate with a big majority. He's got a big majority already on the Supreme Court. He's going to win the House. He's won across racial groups. He's run within the Democratic constituencies. He is going to be more powerful than he was in 2016. And he's done that, by the way, in defiance of the fact that Americans know what he was like as president after he basically led an insurrection. So it is way worse for the Democrats. Oh, and by the way as well, there's no leadership for the Democrats now. All of the old timers are gone. Biden's gone. Pelosi's going to be gone. It is not obvious whatsoever what their argument is going to be to battle him, to combat him, to fight him, and it is not obvious who it is going to be to lead that fight, because it's definitely not going to be Kamala Harris.
I think it's a really interesting experiment now, because he has to own this. There is no one stopping him from implementing whatever he is threatening or promising to do. So if he wants to deport 11 million people, immigrants, he's got to get on with it. If he wants to change the whole tax system to make it a tariff system, he's got to get on with it. I mean, we always talk about, deadlock in Congress and deadlock in the system and how you can't actually achieve anything. When you have this much power, including the Supreme Court, you know what? For the next 4 years, he should get on and do everything that he's threatened to do and see if people like it. Because if there's one thing that came out of last night, I was listening to Gabriel Gatehouse, who, as you know, our colleague who's worked on these sort of extraordinary books and stories called The Coming Storm. And he said, 60% of people in America think the system fundamentally needs changing, fundamentally is broken. That is on Trump now. I mean, if he thinks it is broken and if he's listening to them, what does he do? It can't just be tax cuts for the rich.
Look, as you say, Emily, there is going to be sort of unfettered power. Donald Trump said, I plan to be a dictator from day one, or on day one. And then he clarified it. He doesn't need to. He has got no
He's a
checks and balance
autocrat.
on it. Yeah, he's a democratic autocrat. And there's one other difference, to Lewis's point, about, what is the Democratic opposition? What is the Republican opposition?
No.
In 2016, he couldn't get legislation through then, even though he had the House and the Senate, because he had Paul Ryan, who was the Speaker, who was not a Trumpian, and he had Mitch McConnell in the Senate, who didn't like Donald Trump.
They've all been dispatched.
They've all gone. The forces of resistance have disappeared, and Donald Trump, he can move without any friction at all, because there's nobody there to act as a
template
brake.
presumably is a sort of Erdogan or an Orban kind of project now. Both men, both leaders, in Turkey and Hungary, that he massively admires. I mean, maybe that is where it goes. I want to talk about character for a moment, because we keep on asking the question, or we kept on hearing the question being asked about favourability. And I think one thing that has come out of this is that the rules have massively changed, that politicians we think of as being people who need to make themselves popular. Donald Trump was not liked by many people. He did not have a high favourability account, and yet people decided it didn't matter. And the lawyer David Allen Green just posted this. He said, the candidate was a liar, known to be a liar, and could easily be shown to be a liar, but people voted for that candidate anyway. He was a convicted fraudster. People voted for that candidate. He was, by any meaningful definition, an insurrectionist. People voted for that. And he goes on. I do think we are in a sort of a post-morality world in which that stuff no longer matters.
And I think this is the conundrum and the really difficult searching question. Certainly liberal America has got to ask itself, which is, how attached is the average American voter? How much do they care about the liberal democratic institutions as they've existed up to now? Because there is no doubt in anybody's mind what Donald Trump did or could conceivably have been claimed to do on January the 6th. We know what his attitude is to many of these institutions. He's been very open. I note again, it feels so much like 2016, where, you know, lots of people take to the airwaves and pundits and commentary, particularly on the centre-right and so on, and say, oh yes, Donald Trump's going to be very different in office again. It's exactly the same thing. No, he's not. He's been very, very clear. He's going to pack the civil service. He's going to fill it full of his cronies. He's going to change the mechanisms of the American state to suit his interest and purpose. The only real impediment to that won't be any check on his power. It will be his own kind of fecklessness and sort of lack of application as it was last time. But he's surrounded by even better people now. And so I think that, you know, the really searching question this morning really is whether liberal democratic values in that way, how much purchase they continue to have with the American public.
Look, in 2016, Donald Trump never really thought he was going to win. There had never been any real preparation for a proper transition process of building up the teams who would be in Homeland Security or Defence or wherever it would happen to be. He didn't have a clue who he was appointing. Someone would say, oh, he liked people in uniform, so he said, oh, that general, he's a good bloke, why don't you get him in? And he becomes National Security Advisor.
Like Goldman Sachs. Oh, yeah.
Goldman Sachs, he can run the Treasury, that's all right, we'll get him in. It is not like that now. There are people who have got files bulging with work of what they want to do, the people they want to see, the policies that they want to pursue, and, you know, Project 25 went into hiding for the course of the election, the last few weeks of the election campaign, where Trump was saying, oh, I don't really know these people. They were all ex-Trump people who were drawing up this policy blueprint. They're going to come back out of the woodwork now and be looking for jobs in the Trump administration to deliver on the full-throated MAGA project. I think it's going to be change.
So I guess at some point the post-mortem has to start into where it went wrong for the Democrats. And who was the football pundit who said, you know, where did it all go wrong? And they went over there on that, you know, that green bit over there. It went wrong everywhere. I mean, that is what we now understand. It went wrong throughout the demographic groups, and it went wrong throughout the country. And I guess the question is, was that Kamala Harris's fault for the way she ran the campaign? Did she not have enough time to bed in? Was she not upfront enough with voters about what she knew about Biden? Did she fail to impress? Did she fail to engage on the core questions that, you know, really matter to people? Or was it always going to be Trump's? I mean, you know, maybe he is the winner of this, and maybe anyone against him would have been the loser. We don't know that. And I guess we have to throw into that questions of, you know, race and gender as well, right?
Yeah, look, I think that the truth is, on paper, this should have always been a Republican's view. You know, Biden was unpopular. His administration was unpopular. Rightly or wrongly, he was associated with an economic malaise, even though the economy overall is booming, but people in terms of their real living standards feel worse off. Prices have gone up since 2020 by 20%. Americans feel that. It is hard to be, all of history tells us that when an incumbent administration oversees a period of significant inflation, that they struggle. But was there an opportunity there? Yes, I think there was an opportunity there, but I think that in many ways the undertaker of the 2024 election was not Kamala Harris, who I think that on the basis of this, the results were so striking and was so in Trump's favour, it was such a big win, that it's not like 2016 where you could sort of point to this one thing, or if she'd chosen a different VP, if she'd chosen Josh Shapiro, whatever it is, you could say that would have made the difference. This, I think, was a defeat where the seeds were sown long ago, and I think principally, most of all, that has to go back to Joe Biden's door, because Joe Biden decided, and the people around him, that he would run when he was clearly incapable of running, and Kamala Harris had to take some responsibility herself for that. We all know what happened with the debate, but the consequence, the cost of that was that the Democratic Party had no primary process, and there were two costs within that as well, which is that if they had had a primary process, the Democrats could have chosen someone who was not associated with the incumbent administration, who could conceivably have represented change, or even if they had chosen Harris, at least she would have had time to calibrate her message and actually work out one fundamental answer to one fundamental question which she never had, which is, how are you going to be different to Joe Biden?
Exactly.
She could never respond to.
You know, Lewis, when we were in Chicago in the summer for the Democrat convention, we were saying this could be the most brilliant political coup if it comes off.
Yeah.
And if didn't work, it didn't.
Yeah, but
come
don't
off.
forget, we all called it the Brat Summer. It felt explosive. It felt dynamic. It felt different. She was hitting TikTok. She was getting, young women interested in politics for the first time.
But it didn't work. It hasn't worked. And so I kind of think that where the biggest inquest needs to be is not on Harris's campaign. Harris's campaign was fine. I don't think Harris could have done much that was much different, given that she had been the vice president for 3.5 years and inevitably was tied to Joe Biden. But it's exactly the point you made. I think there was a cover-up at the White House, which is kind of what it sounds like, kind of one of those books that you pick up at the airport, cover-up at the White House. It feels to me that something really extraordinary happened, where people who were in the know, the chief of staff must have known, the kind of key personnel people around.
It stank. Do you know what though? I think we're talking about degrees here. That's all I would say. Yes, it might not have been Kamala Harris. It might have been, Gretchen Whitmer, or it might have been Pete Buttigieg, or both of whom I think are excellent performers. But fundamentally, maybe the Democratic Party is out of fashion at the moment because it is not listening in the same way that the Trump Republican Party is. If this is all about immigration, if this is all about the economy, then we're talking tweaks still. We're not talking radical, fundamental change. That was never what the Democrats were offering. And it sounds like that is what America is asking for, something radical and fundamental to change.
Trump's political superpower is his sense of the visceral, of what is firing up Americans, where the rage lies, and he taps into that brilliantly. And immigration, the state of the economy were the themes that he banged on. And he does rallies where he gets distracted and it's incoherent, and he rambles and he says stupid things, but it makes the audience laugh. He got where a lot of Americans were, who felt they were suffering under the weight of kind of inflation and all the rest of it, and the economic circumstances of the US, and he just said, we can do better. And he's kind of promising a new dawn, a beautiful new dawn for America.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
Well, it hasn't. It's an old dawn that's broken, isn't it?
It's a bit like if they reran the Brexit campaign in the UK and people doubled down and said, yes, more Brexit, harder. Just when you thought that appetite had gone.
And look, you have to credit Trump with the fact that his political resilience is astounding. His political magnetism and ability to generate and maintain such substantial support is astounding. I think as well something that we'll look back on, two things we'll look back on, I think, that actually damaged Democrats in the long term is, one, the midterms of 2022 gave the Democrats false hope, because they thought it was right in the aftermath of the Roe versus Wade overturning, and it basically enabled Biden to stay on. It basically, because they did so well in those elections, it basically quietened all of the voices who were saying that Biden ought to go. And I think that the other thing as well is that, actually I think that the lawsuits against Trump were a mistake, because they help feed that sense with him. He was done.
Hang on, I think that's a really dangerous place to be, because the lawsuits weren't held for a political reason. The lawsuits were the rule of law, and either you believe that no one is above the law, or else you start saying, ooh, I don't want to help his chances.
Well, he's proven he is above the law, because now those lawsuits will just go away.
Yeah.
The lawsuits
But
will
they
go
still
away.
had to happen. I mean, I'm sorry, I thought the New York one, as we said at the time, was kind of slightly overblown, and they had many counts in there which didn't totally stack up. But I mean, what we're looking at, Lewis, is the fact that nobody will be accountable for the attempted insurrection on January the 6th.
He'll let them all go. He's going to let them all go. They're all political prisoners. They're all going to go walk free.
The phone call to Georgia, where he literally asked the election official to find him 11,000 votes. I mean, it caught red-handed.
There is another point in all this. It's a small point, but about the future. We talked about the Supreme Court having a Conservative majority. The Supreme Court has already ruled that a president more or less has total impunity to do what they like if they think it's in the course of their duties.
Yeah.
Donald Trump can do what he likes now. He's
pre-blessed on that front.
There is going to be no prosecution attempts now.
I know.
If anything he does in the White House, if he says, "Oh, that's part of my official duties."
But this is what I think in the long term for the health of American democracy is so devastating, and is perhaps the biggest worry of all, which is that, look, Trump has shown that you can try and overturn an election result. To this day, he will always say, forevermore, that he won 2020. He paid no political price.
No.
None at all. He has been returned to office, not just returned to office, he's been returned to office with an enormous mandate. And what signal, what message does that send to future generations of politicians now? What message does it send to the Democrats? If you can't beat them, join them in those sorts of politics and that sort of approach.
I think Donald Trump will want the history books rewritten. That not only was he the 45th and 47th president, he was the 46th as well. It was just that there was that kind of, the election was stolen from him. I mean, he believes he's won 3 elections now in a row, and at this stage, he looks pretty untouchable.
Well, he's done it. I mean, let's not forget, he has done it on the back of lies. Consistent lies.
Yeah.
He's done it on the back of election denialism. He's done it on the back of telling people falsehoods. I mean, you could start with the cats and dogs, but really, where do you want to end up?
That's what I mean.
And so the Democrats are now looking and saying, well, how do we respond to that? That's your point, right? Should we lie a bit better?
Yeah.
Should we lie harder?
Do we need our own version of Trump?
Do we need our own version of Trump? And is that a sort of...
him.
Yeah, is that that's why I say, is it a post-morality or post-truth sort of era where the voters don't care?
And not just in the US, but it sends that message to states all around the world that, frankly, the United States is not that bothered about the rule of law. It's not that bothered about any of these political norms that it's been trying to uphold. I mean, this is why it's so devastating for Biden in particular. Biden's whole thing, his whole historical mission, was to try and restore the liberal order at home and abroad.
With this election result, wasn't it?
Yes, but with this election result, that task has completely failed. I remember at the time when Biden was elected, he liked to try and say, America is back, and he would say that basically Trump was the blip. What is clear is Trump isn't the blip, Biden was the blip. Trump is actually the restoration, and American politics is going to look more like Trump than Biden in the years to come.
Yeah, I was at the G7 summit in Cornwall, flew over with Biden to go to it, and that was exactly where he was making the big pitch, America is back. And I had a drink with a kind of senior European politician who says to me, yeah, but for how long?
Yeah.
And he was right to ask that question. For how long? Well, broadly 4 years.
Yeah.
Because America is back exactly where it was when Donald Trump was last in office.
But I don't think we know. I don't think we can say, Biden was the blip. Just like we can't say Obama heralded a post-racial America, which he clearly didn't. Each president or presidency belongs in its own arc. We will understand the forces that brought Donald Trump to power, and not the least of those will have been the social media force of people like Elon Musk, who managed to sort of send the messages in the right way at the right time to generate and reverberate falsehoods to more people. I don't think we can necessarily say, the liberal order is dead, we'll never go back to that, or we'll never have a woman.
Of course we can't. Maybe I'm being unduly pessimistic this morning, but I do think that at the very least at the very least we can say that Biden was the blip for this period, because he was the bit of the interregnum. I mean, I think we should just talk about what it means for the world, right? Never mind America, because it is going to have mammoth implications. I mean, for a start, we talked about it a bit last night. Very bad night for Kyiv. Very good night for Moscow. I mean, Biden's now got 3 months to basically funnel as much American military support and aid as he possibly can before the Trump administration takes over. Europe has now got to ask itself some very, very searching questions strategically. If you're sat in Tallinn, which is the capital of Estonia, the Baltic states, next to Russia, you're not feeling especially comfortable this morning. Economically, we've got tariffs coming down the track in short order. This is absolutely mammoth, and is going to affect all of our lives in Europe and elsewhere as well. And obviously there's the effect on Gaza, and the fact that Netanyahu is very, very pleased about this, and maybe most of all for the long term. It's 28 degrees here in Washington today. It's November. Trump is probably going to pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. The idea that there's going to be any progress on climate or leadership from climate from the US in the next 4 years, forget it. So one way or the other, this decision that the Americans have made is going to impact all of us in a profound way.
We'll be back in a moment.
Speaker, the Prime Minister did not distance himself from the remarks made by the Foreign Secretary, and I'm very sure that President Trump will soon be calling to thank him for sending all of those North London Labour activists to campaign for his opponent.
So somehow, amongst all this history, we almost forgot that this was also an historic day for Kemi Badenoch. It was her first Prime Minister's Questions as leader of the opposition, and she decided to go high by goading Keir Starmer, saying that he was acting like a student politician, David Lammy as well, basically gloating that Keir Starmer and Donald Trump might not get on, because David Lammy in the past has said some rather disobliging things about Donald Trump.
Yeah, as him being a KKK person and all the rest of it. Yeah, that's going to be difficult.
Not ideal.
Not ideal. That's going to be difficult for David Lammy. And we know that Donald Trump is someone who nurses his grievances with great love, care and attention.
Yeah, but you know what? What I don't want to see is leaders everywhere fawning because
Correct.
they think that will help
Spot
them.
on.
Boris Johnson fawned with Donald Trump. He never got his trade deal. Malcolm Turnbull, former Prime Minister of Australia I was with last night, said, we had this massive bust-up. It was a real shouting match on the phone call. And after that, we did a deal. Because actually, if you push back on Trump as opposed to fawning all over him, he ends up respecting it. And I think the worst thing Starmer could do now is to, sort of subtly shift Lammy or sort of try and recreate his cabinet in a shape that he thinks would please Trump. He won't do that. I don't believe he'll do that for a moment, but I think that would just send the most terrible signal.
Exactly on that point, Emily, there is a slightly wider thing that does make my blood curdle slightly, which is, seeing overnight the number of sort of very clever commentators, particularly on the right and so on, sort of basically saying, this actually sort of justifies Trump all along. He's just, what the sort of liberals don't get, what they don't understand is how sort of clever he is and what sort of appeal he has to working class Americans. And some of that might be true, but at the same time, it doesn't exculpate Trump in anyone can lie, right? Like everyone can lie, everyone can just spread untruths.
No one can lie quite that consistently.
Yes. But you know what? If you play dirty all of the time and you lie all of the time and you do all of those things all the time and you cheat all the time and you deny elections all of the time, well, guess what? It works. But don't forgive me if I don't want to just sit there and be terribly admiring of him as he does it.
Yeah,
Also,
how do you
think
raise your children? I mean, but it does sort of come back to that. Like, what do you tell your children when they're looking for sort of heroes in life? Well, if I were you, don't worry about the truth. Just go out.
We know hate can motivate people. Politicians
if you
know
feel
that.
like you won Sports Day, you won Sports Day.
But the interesting thing about Kemi Badenoch's approach to this is, in her first Prime Minister's Questions, I look forward to working with the Prime Minister and hoping that we can see eye to eye on some key issues. She went straight for a fight with Keir Starmer over foreign policy, over Britain's relationship with the US, when you would think that is one of the areas where they would agree on. Because foreign policy tends not to be a big dividing line.
Yeah.
It's where they say, yes, I support the right honourable gentleman in what he's trying to do, blah, 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 blah.
I wouldn't also have thought that at this point the Conservatives wanted to be totally MAGA aligned. I mean, that doesn't work. They are not really sister parties. Both, Labour and the Conservatives are probably fundamentally closer to the Democrats in the sense that they have respect for the institutions of the country. But I think, dare I give your former book, your earlier book, another plug?
This episode's getting better and better.
I know. I'm trying to cheer you up. here.
Future books,
But
old books.
You wrote a book in your first years here called If Only They Didn't Speak English, which basically spoke to the foreignness of this country. And it is. I mean, it is an utterly, utterly foreign country, which we feel every time we come. Just the when not in Washington, but when you get out, when you move around the South, when you move around the rural areas, where you talk to people, I remember kind of having lunch with a family in Ohio where they had paper plates. They threw away paper plates every single meal, and that was just how they lived. And I know it sounds crazy, but to your environmental point, it was a new world for me. It's a new world where a family sits down, instead of putting plates in the washing up bowl or in the dishwasher, they throw away their plates every single time.
Sorry, can I just then? I went to a dinner party for 8 people. Bottle of wine's produced. Poured a glass, down the glass. This is before the starter's even served. It is the one bottle of wine for the whole evening. It gets to the end of the night, and the woman, I say, thank you very much for having me. And she says, are you going to be okay to drive home? I thought, drive home? I bloody perform brain surgery right now.
I think we've now.
And they say that we're elites.
I think we've now truly exposed our relationship with this country.
Just pack up and go.
Yeah.
We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
The Newsagents USA.